There's this myth you see popping up on social media all the time about how journalists are supposed to be unbiased. Now, there was back in the day when I did, local reporting, yeah, you have three news sources, and you recorded what they said and put it together in a story, and that's unbiased. But you don't see that much anymore. So, and the bias here at Energy Media is we've made it very plain. The energy transition is here. It's changing the global energy system. Canada has to adapt, so on and so forth. You know all that. If you watch us regularly, you know it inside and out. But here is something we are not allowed to do, and that is to be partisan. We're supposed to always be nonpartisan. And over the course of my voting, over the decades, I voted for every party. Generally, there are a couple of issues, three issues, whatever, that are important to me, and I vote on that basis. And I will vote for whatever party I think has the policies that support those issues, my position on those issues. So I will say, and I'm not embarrassed to say it all, that I voted Liberal because I wanted Mark Carney to be Prime Minister. I mean, the guy's record is impeccable. I can't say this enough. A PhD in economics from Oxford and a central banker and all the storied career the man has had. If we're going to push back against Donald Trump and the United States going forward, you couldn't ask for a better person to be at the helm of economic policy, leading the country. But which Carney did we get? That's the question. I know which one I voted for. I voted for the one that wrote the book Values, Building a Better World for All. Came out in 2021. And the basic message is that modern crises stem from the same root problem. We've got what the market values, what it prices, what the value it assigns is completely different from moral or social worth, values. And Carney advances 7 values that he thinks are important. I'll quickly go through them. Solidarity, mutual dependence. We are a society. We have obligations to other members of society. Shared risk and reward. Fairness, opportunities and outcomes are distributed evenly across people, places, and generations. Responsibility. We all have responsibilities, including to the planet. Resilience. He's an economist. Of course, he talks about institutions and supply chains should be resilient and adaptable, and they should be able to withstand economic shocks like the financial crisis of 2008. We have to be sustainable. Must meet today's needs in ways that safeguard the environment. Dynamism. Innovation is a big deal. That's the problem in Canada. We don't have a lot of research and development compared to other economies like the US, but dynamism, competition, and openness to change, that's something that Carney values. I like that. I'm fine with that. Here's an interesting one. Humility. Policymakers, firms, and citizens need to recognize the limits of their knowledge. Boy, haven't I been accused of that a number of times. Nevertheless, all of those 7 values, I think that's the guy that I voted for. And then on top of that, I mean, he has had, any number of appointments to, he's worked at climate finance, he's worked at, sat on UN committees, on and on. The guy's CV is just impeccable. That's the guy I voted for. I don't think that's the guy I got. The guy I got is the guy that started his career at Goldman Sachs. Because let's not forget, Mark Carney worked at Goldman Sachs from 1988 to 2003 before entering public service. He worked in offices in London, Tokyo, New York, Toronto, and he was the managing director of Goldman Sachs Canada when he left to go to the Bank of Canada. Why is that important? Goldman Sachs, and let's be clear, it's not like Goldman, this is not a criticism of Goldman Sachs as being unethical or whatever. No, they are a highly respected investment banker. They raise capital for projects, they advise on projects all around the world, highly respected. JP Morgan and Citibank and others are kind of like that, and they're in that league. And in Canada, that's true. When I was doing my research for this, Goldman Sachs they are the epitome of corporate Canada. That's my problem with it because they have extensive experience across, the energy, natural resources, infrastructure. That's corporate Canada. We're a natural resources economy. It drives a lot of what we do. And that's where they are. Now, here's the problem with that. We're a small economy, 40 million people, and we have a number. We're dominated by incumbents in a way that the United States and bigger economies like China, not China, but Japan and the UK and so on are not. And look at the oil companies. We got four or five big ones. Look at utilities, four or five big ones, and some smaller ones. On and on. Let me tell you a story. So a couple of years ago, I interviewed a guy named Val Jensen, and he had been a vice president of a power utility in Illinois. And we were talking about process and what was going on with the American power grid and so on. And he said, Markham, he said, I one thing I want to make because I was on the inside of this industry, and don't ever put incumbents in charge of change because they don't want to change. Incumbents have made, they've figured out how to make money, be profitable, given the current circumstances, and they don't want to change that. They will resist change until the bitter end. Some of them are able to re-engineer and pivot and, remake themselves, but very often, Blockbuster gets upset by Netflix. Disruptive innovation comes along and they can't adapt because they're too big and bureaucratic and they go down the tubes. Boy, we have got incumbents like that. And that's in fact what they're doing. So here we have Mark Carney, 15 years at Goldman Sachs. He would have been in the thick of this, right? In whatever, deals Goldman Sachs was doing. That's the culture where he first got into, started his career. And if you look at his approach since becoming prime minister, I mean, we're basically doing a couple things, right? We're going to have internal free trade. Economist, he'd like that. And we're also going to be looking for new trading partners. And he wants to do big projects. And he wants to get them off the ground quickly. He wants to build, build, build. He wants to invest to create jobs, to build the facility so that we can go out and ship our raw materials without much value added out to new partners like Asia and Europe. Okay. The problem is who's going to do that? Because if you want to build, 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 and you want to do it in a hurry, there are many organizations in Canada that can build, build, build. You have to have shovel-ready projects. You have to have capacity. You have to the managerial capacity. You have to have expertise. You have to have access to capital, which only the very large companies can do. This was made for corporate Canada. And one of the things that disturbed me is I've been watching the corporate Canada, like the CEO of the Bank of Montreal, they're writing op-eds and they're in media and on social media, and they are drooling at this opportunity. Can you imagine? You have essentially what we're doing is we have a major projects office. They're considering 32 projects that would be declared projects of national interest, and the Canada will be a partner in some way. We will probably have to change regulations. We will probably wind up putting in capital. And don't say we won't put in capital, because already on the oil sands, the federal government has given investment tax credits up to $8 billion for carbon capture and storage, and only 10 to 12% of the total oil sands greenhouse gas emissions. Who knows how many tens of billions more? I would say probably, based on comments from oil sands CEOs, it'd probably be in the neighborhood of $50 billion that they're expecting government to kick in. And that was years ago. So it's probably even more. So this is a problem. I mean, we have basically taken a strategy, and our prime minister is at the forefront of it, where we are courting corporate Canada to come and invest and do these projects. And I guarantee you It'll be different for every incumbent, every industry, but they're going to be asking for things. They're going to ask for tax breaks. They're going to ask for regulatory change. Look at all the change, the regulatory changes that Alberta and the oil industry are demanding. Like, there's a list of 9 of them that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has advanced. That's why Carney's choice of Minister of Natural Resources was really telling, because it's his old buddy, Tim Hodgson, from Goldman Sachs, Canada. Tim Hodgson was the CEO from 2005 to 2010 before he left to join Carney at the Bank of Canada. He was the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and his reputation is as a deal maker, as a bulldog. He gets stuff done. He moves stuff. And if you're Carney and what you're really, you're not values Carney, you're not climate change Carney, climate finance Carney, you're Goldman Sachs Carney, who wants to build, build, build and get stuff done and, get projects approved in 2 years and on and on. Tim Hodgson is exactly the kind of lieutenant, that you need in your cabinet. And that's his role here. And all we've seen from Tim Hodgson since he was appointed Minister of Energy is rah, 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 cheerleading. We're going to be an energy superpower. His department is absolutely convinced that the most bullish scenario from the International Energy Agency applies to LNG, not the middle case or the least bullish, the more bearish one. No, no, no. It's all bull. The bulls are in control. That scares me, because one thing that we know, and we covered this, I don't know, thousands of times here at Energy Media over the last 6 or 7 years, the global energy system is changing dramatically. China is the first electrostate. It is driving change in the global energy system. It's electrifying itself. It's exporting its electric technologies out into the global south. And that, if you read those, the modeling exercises, they're based on the assumption that the global south will remain big users of oil and gas. And I don't think that the trends are not in that direction at all. So we got a major change here. Now, in the previous video that I did today, and remember this, I said at the end of that one, this one would be the second part of that. And really what I mean was, I argued in the first video that Canada has missed the long cycle change in the energy system. That we started in the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution and James Watt and the steam engine and all of that, and we were combusting fossil fuels. Started with coal, then oil and gas. And we combust a commodity, fossil fuels, to create heat, which we then turn into energy. It's very inefficient. It doesn't matter what combustion device you're using, it's inefficient. Now we have new technology to create electricity directly, and this is the real revolution. You'll hear me say this quite often. The real revolution is in the demand side. We now can make devices that can use electricity to create work. Electric vehicles, heat pumps, industrial processes, heat batteries, on and on and on. And they're getting better and cheaper and more efficient. They're competitive now. They're starting to push the fossil fuel, compete with the fossil fuels. We won't see them push it out just yet. We're looking at peak oil demand 2029, peak gas demand sometime in the 2030s. That's what's coming. We, Canada, led by Goldman Sachs Carney and Goldman Sachs Hodgson, are stuck in the old cycle. They think that the combustion cycle, the combustion economy is going to dominate well up at least to 2050 and beyond. That's the scenarios that they believe in. Big mistake. And this is what we're missing here, is an opportunity to change things, to add value to our natural resources. Stop shipping raw material someplace else to be processed. I'll give you an example in Alberta. Bitumen could be made into carbon fiber, an asphalt binder, and graphite. Or we could take a page out of from the Saudis and the Chinese and build on the petrochemical complex near Edmonton and do crude to chemical processing. All sorts of these opportunities are available, and all we want to do is the same thing we've always done, which is dig it up and ship it out someplace else for processing, and that's how we make our money. And that's the problem with putting corporate Canada at the head of this process, is they're not going to innovate. Remember, one of the values that, values Carney was talking about was innovation. Corporate Canada is not going to innovate. That comes from outside of corporate Canada. So this is a big problem. Is basically we got the wrong we had our prime minister we got the wrong prime minister. We needed the values Carney, we got the Goldman Sachs Carney. And the fact that Tim Hodgson is his minister, essentially the Minister of Energy, is a big, big tell. So I have a problem with that. And be feel free to comment. And if you disagree with me, because I know there's still a lot of residual goodwill towards Carney, he's still in his honeymoon period, I think. But this is a legitimate criticism, I think, and something that we should be paying attention to. Because it's not too late to put pressure on your members of parliament to make your view, make your voice heard. And maybe we can get them to, the powers that be, the federal government, to change its strategy to be more like the values Carney that we thought we were getting.